We got a number of good investigations digging out the expenditures of the budget for construction of the roads, airports, infrastructural objects, as well as stadiums, and all other things dedicated to the Euro Championship. And the issues that we are going to discuss today with our speakers are dedicated not only to the money. We will talk also about the people, and we will talk about how to do the stories dedicated to the sport. And we will start with Lucio de Castro, the reporter of ESPN Brazil. And I will pass in the floor to Lucio.
Bom, obrigado. Muito obrigado a todos por estarem aqui. Sejam bem-vindos aqui e aproveitem a nossa cidade. Na verdade, assim, eu vou fazer uma brevíssima, rápida. Eu vou mostrar 3 casos que eu acho que resumem um pouco o nosso trabalho nos últimos tempos aqui da imprensa brasileira, em investigações na área do esporte, e que também dão um pouco do painel das nossas dificuldades, dos nossos problemas e algumas questões básicas. Na verdade, eu sentei aqui hoje do lado deles e também eu me lembrei muito não sei se vocês vão lembrar, alguns aqui eu estou vendo são bem novos, eu me lembrei muito, eu queria muito ouvir a palestra deles. Eu me lembrei muito do Zé do Carmo. O Zé do Carmo era um jogador folclórico do Brasil. Não sei se vocês vão lembrar que ele não era um grande jogador, mas era um jogador viril. E uma vez ele foi num jogo e aí o Zico ia bater uma falta e ele estava na barreira. E aí ele se virou, o Zico estava aqui, ele se virou de frente para o goleiro. E o goleiro falou... Zé, olha para lá, pro batedor, não olha para mim. Aí ele falou assim, não, você acha que eu quero perder esse gol? Eu também quero ver o gol. E hoje eu estou mais ou menos na mesma situação. Vou falar um pouco, ser bem breve, porque eu também quero ver o gol deles. Eu quero mais ver o gol deles do que o meu próprio. Então, vou ser bem breve aqui desses 3 casos aqui e falar com vocês. O primeiro caso que eu trouxe para vocês é uma investigação que começa em 2009, sobre o Ricardo Teixeira. Aliás, eu estava preocupado com o Andrew, que o Ricardo Teixeira uma vez prometeu que o Andrew jamais entraria no Brasil novamente. Então, fiquei muito feliz de ver o Andrew aqui hoje. Enfim, você pode... Vou botar o primeiro aqui, por favor. Eu tinha... Uma das coisas assim, que mais me importavam e que eu ficava sempre assim, era saber... Porque um cara como o Ricardo Teixeira, ele movimenta uma quantia muito grande de dinheiro, mas ele não é, na verdade, o Ricardo Teixeira, como vocês todos conhecem, é um tosco, é um cara rude de ideias, um cara que não tem um refinamento para mexer com tanta quantidade de dinheiro. E todos esses caras, assim, a experiência nos mostra que eles têm um grande homem de finanças mexendo com o dinheiro dele. Alguém precisa fazer esse serviço de mexer com o dinheiro dele, mandar para fora, lavar esse dinheiro. Então me intrigava muito essa questão, descobrir quem era essa pessoa. Esse cara tinha que ter, acho que muitas matérias se faziam, mas a gente faltava descobrir quem era esse cara que mexia no dinheiro do Ricardo Teixeira. E a partir de 2009 eu começo a mexer muito com essa ideia, tentar descobrir quem é esse cara que mexe com o dinheiro do Ricardo Teixeira. E aí eu vou descobrir um personagem, ouvindo, conversando com muita gente, muitas fontes diferentes, muitas informações. A gente vai descobrir todos os caminhos indicavam o mesmo nome, dessa pessoa que mexia no dinheiro dele. Esse homem era Cláudio Honigman, esse que está aqui na ponta. Essa foto que a gente está vendo é uma temporada no mar Mediterrâneo de Cláudio Honigman, Ricardo Teixeira, e o homem oculto é Sandro Rossell, presidente do Barcelona. Eles estão a bordo de um iate, o Blue Heron, que cada temporada de uma semana custa 100 mil euros. Enfim, todas as pistas caíam nesse homem, como grande homem de finanças de Ricardo Teixeira. E aí eu comecei a seguir aquelas velhas 2 lições, né? Uma das velhas lições do jornalismo, do follow the money, e indo atrás de Honigman e tentando descobrir. E a outra lição que o tempo me ensinou, essa não está na velha investigação de todos os homens do presidente que nos ensinam follow the money, mas está numa lição contemporânea que é siga sempre uma ex-mulher, que uma ex-mulher está sempre disposta a falar alguma coisa. E encontro a ex-mulher de Cláudio Honigman, separada. Cláudio Honigman era um personagem considerado um menino de ouro do mercado financeiro, desses capazes, desses garotos que quando novos são considerados as águias no mercado financeiro, um cara super inteligente, e se deslumbra e, entre outras coisas, ele passa num cabaré de luxo em São Paulo, se apaixona por uma mulher desse cabaré e leva essa mulher e abandona a sua primeira mulher. Então essa primeira mulher era um potencial fonte que ela tinha muita mágoa dele. Ela era um pouco, eu posso falar que ela não estava nos ouvindo, um pouco confusa, as ideias tinha uma sede de vingança, mas muitas das coisas que ela falava eram muito interessantes, e se ela não tinha total clareza das coisas dele, ela pelo menos me indicava caminhos para eu procurar algumas informações. A partir da descoberta de quem era Cláudio Honigman e de algumas ideias que ela me passou, sempre filtrando um pouco as coisas que ela me falava, até entender um pouco, eu começo uma busca em todos os caminhos por onde normalmente a gente faz para seguir o dinheiro, né? Junta comercial do Rio de Janeiro, de São Paulo, por onde você vê onde se montam as empresas, e a transformação dessas empresas, justiça, tribunais, ver todos os processos que ele estava envolvido, e começo a fazer um rastreamento da vida desse cara. Resumindo bem, assim, para a gente ver o gol deles, e depois também poder falar desses outros 2 casos que eu falei, a gente chega até mais ou menos aquele gráfico ali. Não, é aquele do lado mesmo ali. Que é um pouco a transformação das empresas, como as empresas dele vão se transformando de um período para cá, e uma vai se transformando na outra, e sempre uma ligação direta com os eventos da Confederação Brasileira de Futebol, até culminar em 2009, aquele amistoso Brasil e Portugal, de 19 de novembro de 2009, o célebre, que Cláudio Honigman tem um momento espetacular que mostra realmente o gênio que ele era do mercado financeiro. Cláudio Honigman era esperado em Brasília, naquele Brasil e Portugal, por Ricardo Teixeira, pelos seus amigos de farra e de festa, e Cláudio Honigman some naquele dia em Brasília, não aparece. E aí a gente começa a circular um grande rumor que um dinheiro de Ricardo Teixeira teria sumido, e a gente vai descobrir que através de fontes também na Polícia Federal, Infraero, que Cláudio Honigman, naquele dia 19 de novembro, tinha 2 passagens marcadas para sair do Brasil, uma para Paris, outra para Nova York, com a moça do cabaré. E Cláudio Honigman marca essas 2 passagens e sai. Depois a gente vai descobrir que ele foi para Paris primeiro e depois de Paris para Nova York. E como hoje em dia, o mercado financeiro hoje, você pode do seu computador movimentar uma grande soma de dinheiro, a gente vai descobrir que ele deu um pinote, deu um calote em Ricardo Teixeira, desvia, como ele movimentava o dinheiro de Ricardo Teixeira, ele desvia uma quantidade de Ricardo Teixeira. E Ricardo Teixeira, ele desvia por uma questão muito simples. O ladrão que rouba ladrão tem 100 anos de perdão, né? E o Ricardo Teixeira não poderia entrar na delegacia de polícia e reclamar aquele dinheiro, porque aquele dinheiro era roubado. Então, a outra chance era matar Cláudio Honigman. E ele some no mundo. Bom, nesse meio caminho, a gente, através dessas ligações dessas empresas, mostrando o percurso dessas empresas, a gente descobre e consegue comprovar, eu não fiz graficamente, mas está aqui, e fazer essa matéria, o amigo oculto o amigo oculto, comprovando que essas empresas de Cláudio Honigman e de Sandro Rossel, aqui tem essa sombra que você conhece bem, do senhor Rick Trick, a gente descobre que essas empresas tinham um sócio oculto e consegue comprovar que Ricardo Teixeira é sócio dessas empresas. As próprias empresas que exploravam o negócio do futebol brasileiro tinha um sócio oculto, e a gente consegue comprovar, através desse caminho todo percorrido, que Ricardo Teixeira era sócio dessas empresas, ou seja, ele se beneficiava do dinheiro que a seleção brasileira ganhava. Então, rapidamente, esse é um breve percurso para a gente mostrar como a gente chegou até poder montar todo esse esquema, depois percorrendo todos os caminhos, junta comercial, justiça, através, primeiramente, de uma pista. Então, esse foi um dos caminhos dessa reportagem. E é um caso que teve uma grande repercussão. A partir daí, outras matérias de outros meios de comunicação vieram, ainda bem. A gente não tem a pretensão de ser só o dono de uma matéria. Quando você faz uma matéria, a partir daí, outros farão. E avançaram muito nessa reportagem. A pressão cresce muito também, e por causa das coisas que se faziam lá fora também, para Ricardo Teixeira, até chegar o momento que, aí muito por causa das relações com o FIFA, etc., Andrew vai falar mais, ele é obrigado a sair. Mas, enfim, esse foi o processo que a gente conseguiu montar todo esse esquema. Vou falar brevemente de uma segunda reportagem também, que a gente fez aqui, um caso, que é o caso do Maracanã. Senhor Rick Trick, na linha. É Teixeira, Andrew? Ou é Avelange? Pode ser. O Maracanã, o segundo caso que a gente fez uma matéria recente é a questão do Maracanã. O Maracanã, para quem não tem acompanhado muito de perto, recebeu uma obra de 1 bilhão e 200 reais, aproximadamente. Eu não sou muito bom de números, mas acho que uns 700 milhões de dólares, né, a reforma do Maracanã. E um processo que todo mundo fez reportagens e altamente viciado de concorrência. E o grave dessa história toda é que o Maracanã, depois de 1 bilhão investido pelo Estado, 1 bilhão e 200, foi entregue à iniciativa privada, a empreiteiras que, coincidentemente, eram financiadoras de campanha do nosso governador Sérgio Cabral, governador do Rio de Janeiro. Então, ele pega um patrimônio histórico do Rio de Janeiro, do Brasil, investe 1 bilhão e 200 na reforma e depois entrega aos seus financiadores de campanha que ganharam a exploração por 35 anos. Isso foi amplamente denunciado, mostrado, esse escândalo. Mas o que mais me chamava a atenção, esse é o tipo da matéria. Eu acho que um dos nossos papéis é a gente farejar um pouco aonde tem o cheiro de coisa ruim, né? Só que essa matéria, para onde você olhava, tinha coisa ruim. E uma das coisas que chamava muita atenção e me indignava profundamente, porque quem é do Rio sabe disso, a nossa relação com o Maracanã, com o estádio do Maracanã, a cidade do Rio, o amor que ele tinha pelo estádio, é que como é que esses caras puderam mudar um patrimônio tombado, um patrimônio histórico tombado. O Maracanã foi transformado, toda a sua cara foi transformada e modificada, e a gente estava falando de um bem tombado pelo patrimônio histórico. Um patrimônio histórico no Brasil só pode ser mexido com uma assinatura da Presidência da República. A única forma é pela lei, artigo 17º do decreto 25 de 1934, que determina que no Brasil qualquer patrimônio histórico só pode ser modificado com a assinatura direta da Presidência da República. E é óbvio que a Presidenta da República não iria, nesse momento, assinar um destombamento do Maracanã, que se pudesse mexer no Maracanã, que seria uma medida altamente impopular. Você pode abrir todos os arquivos? Pode abrir todos, não dá para abrir tudo? Os 5, são 5 fotos. Aí. Bom, enfim. Então, a grande questão era como é que esses caras mexeram no Maracanã, um bem tombado pelo patrimônio histórico, acima da lei, mexeram na cara do Maracanã para entregar para a iniciativa privada do amigo financiador de campanha. E essa questão começa a nos incomodar. Eu, em parceria com uma repórter, a Gabriela Moreira, que não está aqui no momento, grande repórter, começamos aí, enquanto todo mundo estava muito ligado nas questões das empreiteiras, a gente começa a percorrer um outro caminho e vai no patrimônio histórico. Aquilo ali é só uma parte da documentação que a gente começa a ver pacientemente durante meses. E aí a gente começa a entender como se chegou àquilo, através dessa documentação. E aí a gente chega naquele sujeito ali, Carlos Fernando Souza Leão. A gente vai descobrir como esses caras burlaram a lei, como o governo burlou a lei e entregou a questão do Maracanã, você fazer essa reforma sem conseguir a assinatura da Presidência da República acima da lei, entregando ao seu amigo financiador. Ele, através de um golpe, esse sujeito ali assina um papel autorizando a reforma do Maracanã. E aí a gente começa um levantamento sobre a vida desse sujeito. Entre os papéis a gente descobriu que quem autorizou foi aquele senhor ali, Carlos Souza Leão. E quem é esse sujeito? Levantando os bens desse cara, levantando a vida desse cara, a gente vai descobrir que esse sujeito é simplesmente funcionário do senhor Sérgio Cabral, do governo do Estado. A gente consegue a ata da reunião do Conselho Consultivo do IPHAN e reconstitui até a reunião onde aquilo é considerado como um crime e a gente consegue mostrar que o que aconteceu na reforma do Maracanã foi um crime. Resumindo, assim, em poucas palavras, mais ou menos essa história, para realmente chegarmos à última. Então, é um crime gravíssimo. E o que mais me incomodou nessa história? A de Ricardo Teixeira repercutiu muito no Brasil. Essa história aqui foi silenciada praticamente. Essa história, pouquíssima gente viram em outros meios, ninguém viu isso, o que nos mostra um pouco a força econômica das empreiteiras no Brasil, do processo político. Essa matéria ficou quase secreta, ninguém reproduziu, ninguém comentou, o que muito me incomoda. E hoje a realidade é que o Maracanã foi modificado, um patrimônio histórico do Brasil foi modificado. Falando rapidamente agora do último caso, a gente, por muito tempo, por mais de 40 anos, a gente ouviu que a ditadura militar no Brasil utilizou, a gente teve uma ditadura, para quem é de fora, de 1964 a 1985, o regime militar, e que ele teria utilizado muito o futebol como arma de propaganda. Mas isso foi sempre um chavão, que se repetia, a ditadura usou o futebol, mas nunca se mostrou como. Então, durante quase um ano, eu me dediquei à busca incessante de arquivos, a ouvir várias fontes diferentes, para entender como a ditadura tinha usado o futebol. Eu acho que essa série, muitos de vocês viram, acompanharam, Memórias do Chumbo, e a gente consegue mostrar, pode abrir todos os documentos? A gente consegue mostrar, entre outras coisas, e aqui novamente resumindo, a gente consegue mostrar que, primeiro, a ditadura tomou conta de toda a sociedade brasileira em vários aspectos, e o futebol predominantemente, pela importância que tem. Então, todos os clubes do Brasil estavam sob o controle direto dos militares. A gente vê ali um documento onde fala do Fluminense, existiam militares dentro de cada clube, presentes em cada clube, em cada instituição do Brasil. Aqui a gente tem um documento Fluminense, mas a gente tem de todos os outros, mostrando. A gente consegue mostrar também que esse senhor aqui estava dentro da comissão técnica de 70, isso ficou durante 40 anos em silêncio. Esse senhor estava envolvido em torturas, foi um dos piores torturadores da história do Brasil, e ele estava dentro da comissão técnica na Copa de 70, ele junto ali com os jogadores, aquela seleção maravilhosa. Esse senhor estava ali para controlar os jogadores, para que eventualmente nenhum falasse alguma coisa. A gente, depois de 40 anos, a gente consegue mostrar que esse cara estava lá dentro e que esse cara foi envolvido em tortura. Então a gente começa a desmistificar um monte de coisa e mostrar um monte de chavão daquele momento. E entre outras coisas também, pode abrir de novo e botar Pelé. Pelé, durante muito tempo também, gostou de dizer que ele não foi à Copa de 74 porque ele era contra a ditadura. Com o passar dos anos, as pessoas recontam a sua própria história, né, e remontam ao seu próprio sabor. E Pelé fez isso com muita propriedade. E todos nós, por muito tempo, foi uma história muito conveniente. Que Pelé, e ficou muito bonito, né, que Pelé foi contra a ditadura e não jogou em 74 por causa disso. E o Brasil, durante 40 anos, repetiu essa história. E aí a gente consegue achar num dos arquivos um documento mostrando que Pelé, em 1970, quando chega da Copa do Mundo, campeão do mundo, o maior jogador de todos os tempos, e tem todo o meu respeito o Pelé, o Edson nem tanto, Pelé estava nos porões da ditadura, tinha ido ao doicode, onde se praticava tortura, e tinha manifestado todo o seu apoio à ditadura militar, e se prontificado, se necessário, a fazer pronunciamentos naquele momento públicos defendendo a ditadura militar. Então, acho que a gente consegue. Pelé não quis falar sobre o assunto, eu tentei várias vezes, não quis. Pode abrir tudo de novo? E a gente consegue mostrar que depois de 40 anos que aquela história não era bem assim. A gente tem também o monitoramento do Avelange, da ditadura militar, os casos de corrupção do Avelange. Mas, enfim, acho que a gente consegue avançar muito num tema que durante muitos anos foi chavão no Brasil e que a gente conseguiu. Na verdade, para encerrar, eu só tentando traçar esse painel aqui, para quem é de fora, principalmente do nosso momento, do jornalismo investigativo no Brasil, a gente tem conseguido avançar em muitas coisas, a gente tem uma democracia muito nova e nesse pouco tempo a gente conseguiu bastante avanço, mas falta muita coisa e o momento me parece assim extremamente, apesar desse avanço, apesar dessas boas coisas que temos conseguido, o momento me parece extremamente grave e preocupante porque, principalmente na área do jornalismo esportivo, há uma tendência, todo mundo sabe, aqui a gente tem um grande monopólio, 90% dos órgãos de imprensa concentrados em uma mão, e os 10% ou 5% que ainda se dispõem a investir em investigações, me parecem cada vez menos dispostos a investir em investigações em matérias desse tipo e dispostos a repetir que esporte é entretenimento apenas. A vida, a prática, essas matérias nos mostram que esporte é muito mais do que entretenimento, esporte tem política dentro, mas a gente continua na luta, apesar do cenário parecer muito desfavorável para todos nós.
Thank you, Lucio. Yeah, as I see, I'm not from Brazil. Yeah, there are a lot of topics to be investigated, and that's not only about the money, that's not only about the people. As we see, the sport is the entertainment, and it might affect the emotional side of the people, and it might be used for the propaganda and for the stuff in a government to attract people. And I want to pass the floor to Rob Rose, our colleague from South Africa, and we will take the round of speakers, and then we will ask you to ask the questions to our speakers. Go ahead, Rob.
That's not good.
We have some technical stuff.
Do you want to try it off the IPYS on there? Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Well, perhaps I should start talking. Anyway, Brazil might be a very young democracy, but South Africa is also a very young democracy. And those are amazing stories that I think you guys have got into. I mean, I find, as an investigative journalist, that there's lots of scope to do a lot of work in investigating sports because conventional sports journalists never tend to look at this sort of stuff. So I think as an investigative journalist, there's lots of scope to investigate kind of governance issues. So it's fascinating. It's a great thing to do, and there are lots of there's amazing monopolies to break open. Andrew's going to speak about FIFA in a minute, and that's an amazing monopoly. But I thought what would be useful, especially considering Brazil is hosting the next World Cup, is to have a look at what happened with the South African World Cup last year in 2010 in South Africa and how it worked out, and some of the stories that I'm sure you guys never would have heard about and probably haven't heard about because these stories tended to get submerged beneath the kind of great goodwill and big pictures of people playing in stadiums and that sort of thing. So hopefully if this ever works, then I can talk about that. Essentially, for us, it was an event, the World Cup in 2010. It was the first time Africa had the World Cup, and it was a huge event for us. We spent lots and lots of money. I think it was about $3.5 billion on building stadiums for the event, on putting in place systems to handle it. And the big question is, what did South Africa get from that event? What did Africa get from that event? And it turns out not very much. We've got a lot of stadiums that are sitting empty at the moment that we can't do anything with. All the money that was made by the event got diverted into people close to FIFA and various other companies. So that's essentially what happened in South Africa's World Cup. I wanted to show you some of the slides which would have illustrated that. Is it going to work, do you think?
It will work, but just a couple of minutes.
Okay, I mean, I think what I'll do is I'll just start talking, and then hopefully it'll come join me along the way. I mean, FIFA itself, I mean, they control the awarding of the World Cup. It's essentially it's like the hand of God reaches down. Sepp Blatter is like the hand of God. He reaches down and bestows this gift on countries, and you're supposed to be incredibly thankful, never question the word of FIFA, never question the word of Sepp Blatter, and for the dubious honor of hosting this event. Essentially, the television rights, I think, bring FIFA something like television rights, hospitality rights, broadcasting rights, the whole suite brings FIFA in $3 billion, and it's a lot of money for the firm, for the company. So essentially, it becomes this big scramble for these guys to get as much of that as possible. In our case, FIFA came and lent on the South African government quite extensively. They lent on Nelson Mandela, who is essentially this big icon of South Africa. And they said to us that unless Nelson Mandela is able to come and be part of the actual presentation ceremony, South Africa's chances of getting the event weren't that high. Why don't we talk about how great results investigations are? Thanks, buddy. Seven, 8, 9%, 12%. So what I'll do is I'll talk about the World Cup 3 years ago. The main stadium we built to host the opening game against Mexico and the final was at this fantastic stadium called Soccer City. It was built to look like an African calabash, and it's an immense stadium. But it cost about $3.5 billion to build this thing, which is a lot of money in a country that doesn't have that much money to go around. And what happened in this case is that we each, investigative journalists from different corners of the country, were asked to collaborate on this project to look at different stadiums and the contracts that were put in place around these stadiums. And what happened in our case is I looked at Soccer City because it was the flagship project and the contracts were fascinating around it. And it turned out to be a fascinating case. FIFA refused to reveal any of the projects. Oh, yay. Now you'll find it incredibly boring and not worth it, so I hope not.
Yes, we did it.
That's great. F5, yeah?
No,
F8.
go to the file, to view and full screen by mouse.
Oh, one, fine. So essentially, I don't know why I feel so much better that I can look at something on the screen. It makes me feel. But also, I think it helps to bring home what was actually being built, the tactile creation of these stadiums. So essentially, that was the stadium I was talking about, Soccer City, which was used to host the opening game. I've been through that. Essentially, it's the big money involved with FIFA, the television rights, and the fact that before this, the government even warned of the fact that there is a potential for lots of money to go missing, essentially, in corruption. And yet the country put in place no systems to handle that, no system to detect the corruption, despite that, partially because Sepp Blatter and FIFA were not keen that we do any disclosure around the projects and the contracts. I think that's a cartoon. Our cartoonists were pretty great at capturing what FIFA is actually about, and that illustrated the fact that he really has just conquered the world, and Sepp, what Sepp says goes, which certainly happened in South Africa, to the detriment of the country, to the detriment of the citizens, and ultimately to people who watched the game. Essentially, Cape Town was due to get a stadium. Cape Town had a stadium that was going to be built that would be very useful after the World Cup for essentially about $1 billion. But Sepp Blatter decided it wasn't worth it. It wasn't good to do that. He wanted it somewhere else, so he just lent on our president to move it. And at a cost of 4 times the price, there's now this gigantic stadium that sits in Cape Town. It's gorgeous, but it's completely useless. I mean, nobody's going to do anything with it. So it sits there and has become this white elephant at Sepp's request. This was where I started looking at this case. People come to Africa and South Africa for a few reasons, and safari parks was definitely one of the attractions for people to come to South Africa for the game. But I wondered, we have our national park, which is the Kruger National Park, with the Big Five, and it's a big attraction. And the prices of accommodation at the Kruger National Park had just gone through the roof beforehand. They'd gone to ridiculous prices, nearly $4,500 a night compared to $700. But the thing is that the actual institution that ran it wasn't going to get this money. I then spoke to a couple of B&B owners who also were hoping to get lots of money from, but they were told by FIFA that they could only charge an extra 30% on their prices. But that wasn't what was happening in practice. The prices had gone through the roof. So I began to wonder, I suppose, where the money was actually going, which led us onto something else, which led us onto 2 companies with very close links to FIFA called Match Hospitality and Match Event Services. It turned out that Match Hospitality, which is a company closely linked to, which is essentially, its 10% shareholder is a company called Infront Sports, which survived a major corruption scandal a couple of years before. And it's run by a guy called Philippe Blatter, who's the nephew of Sepp Blatter. And this company pops up as the company that has all the rights to market the accommodation for the World Cup. These are the guys who are going to make the money from the event, from the accommodation being hiked so dramatically. So I began asking questions about that. The other company that is part of it was Match Event Services, which was owned and run by a family that's pretty close to the FIFA crowd. They're based in Zug, and the contracts I found fascinating. But the thing is that FIFA refused to reveal any of these contracts. The Mail and Guardian newspaper, which is a really strong investigative newspaper in South Africa, they went to court to get these court documents, to get the contracts from FIFA. Our government was actually keen to release some of the documents, but FIFA resisted. So they actually went to court and used our access to information laws to prise the contracts out of their hands. And that actually, they succeeded in court, but they succeeded in court in 2011 after the World Cup happened. So it's interesting to see, but it's of negligible benefit. That's essentially Soccer City, the stadium I was speaking about. It was built at a massive cost, $320 million, as part of the $3 billion spent on the entire stadiums, all the stadiums in South Africa. We were meant to get 10% of the gate proceeds from all the games held there, the final, the opening game. It was meant to be a big money spinner for South Africa. But when we started to investigate, it turns out that none of that money was going to go back to the country. What happened is, to get the contracts, FIFA resisted giving us the contracts. So we went and spoke to everyone we could. We spoke to the bankers of the project. We spoke to lawyers who were involved in various elements of it. And eventually, as happens eventually, some guy drops off an entire CD of documents for you, and that's everything you need. You speak to about 40 people beforehand, but you get nothing. But then one guy gives you everything. And in this case, we were able to find that there's a shady company set up called National Stadium South Africa. It was set up shortly before the event happened. and they got the contract to manage Soccer City for the next 10 years. This company, in South Africa, we have a policy, laws called Black Economic Empowerment. The aim of Black Economic Empowerment is to change the fact that during apartheid, whites were the only people who benefited in the country economically. Even now, the majority of the wealth in South Africa is still with white people. So the policy, Black Economic Empowerment, aims to change that by introducing stipulations that, for example, if you do a big project like a construction project, you should have black partners. 26% at least of the project should benefit the previously disadvantaged in our country. It's their way of trickling down benefits. It's a very slow process and it hasn't paid the sort of dividends it should have. But the fact is that what happens is you're supposed to have black partners. Now in this case, National Stadium just faked that. They forged the fact that they had black partners. They had a security guard who they got to pretend that he was a 26% shareholder. The guy he wasn't allowed to fire anyone, he wasn't allowed to hire anyone, he couldn't sign any checks, he didn't pay any money to get the shares, he wasn't given any money throughout the whole process. He was just essentially what we call a front for the white owners so they could get the contract. That's the guy who owns, that's where he lives, the guy who supposedly owns 26% of this major company running the World Cup Stadium. It's a house that I think was bought for about $10,000. It's in what's called a township, a very, very low income area in South Africa. There are no tar roads in that area. And this is the guy who supposedly is a big beneficiary of the World Cup money. And it was through the contracts I got, through digging through the contracts and looking through the individual person's responsibilities in the contract, that I thought that it just, like you said, like you essentially, something doesn't smell right, so you go and dig a bit and speak to the guy, and he was very nervous and didn't want to speak, obviously, because he's a front for the other guys. But then eventually he did speak to us, and it was a interesting talk. As part of that, we also found out that all the money essentially is going to this company called National Stadium South Africa. All the gate proceeds that FIFA said would go back to benefit the country, a small benefit for building massive stadiums that aren't going to be used. The least they could have done was give us some money as a consequence. Well, gate proceeds, that was their reasoning. But then it turned out they'd done these secret deals to essentially hive off all the gate proceeds to this company, National Stadium South Africa. This was never disclosed to anyone. The country believed that they would get at least some economic trickle-down effect of the World Cup, but that never happened. And this was contained in those contracts on the CD, which we managed to prize out of the banks. It later turned out that our construction companies had been colluding on the contracts. Even to build the stadiums, they had got together in rooms and had decided which company was going to build this stadium, which company was going to build that stadium. Then what they would do is they would submit fake tenders. They would say, this company is going to submit a tender for $2 billion, and this one will submit one for $4 billion. They'll never pick that one, but you can have the Cape Town Stadium. Essentially just bid rigging in a very obvious sense. And it's the thing that drove up the costs of the stadium for people in the country and ultimately negatively impacted on the country as a whole. It was discovered this year that they had done this. 61 billion rands worth of projects, which equates to about $6.1 billion. It was a lot of money. And that's the current situation in South Africa, which is what other countries who do this might be faced with, white elephants that aren't used. You essentially bend over and do SEP's bidding, and then you end up with these things that are of no use to anyone, really, as is aptly illustrated in the cartoon. I think these cases are pretty important, I think, because for us it was a learning curve in South Africa. Very few journalists covered stuff in this sort of depth. Like I said, the sports journalists tend not to cover this sort of thing. But as a massive event, it was the first one we've ever hosted, and it taught us a lot about where the problems come in, the conflict of interest, the related party deals that benefit people you don't think of, and the value of prizing contracts out of people's hands, using the access to information laws, which is what we did in this country, in that country. Yeah. And that cartoon at the end, I think, aptly illustrates it. It's President Jacob Zuma on the side of a street, like a prostitute, and Sep's throwing out a little bundle of cash. Thanks a lot for hosting it. You've been great. And we'll come next time. We need some joy from Africa. So, yeah, that's essentially my bit.
I'm following two very good acts. Mr. Castro telling you about the investigations into your own administrators. Because, of course, he's quite right about Teixeira, Claudia Honigman on the fringes, but it's the whole bloody CBF, isn't it? Teixeira goes, in comes Marion. What's the guy, Janeiro, the other guy who's now at FIFA? They're criminals. And your job for the older journalists, as you've been shown, is to do the investigations, to you know the skills to how to find it. For younger journalists, please learn the skills. Give it a try. Find people who can mentor you, who can say, no, don't do it this way, do it that way. And then it's fun. It needs to be fun because we're doing moral things and we can have a good laugh afterwards because they're crooks. But have this feeling of fun when you're working because the people want it out there. They want it, if you think, they want to know what we find out. And in a way, that's all that matters. We're doing it for the people. Right, well, I want to talk about two things today. Technique, really just technique. So I would just come back to what Rob's been saying. Now, I didn't hear him very well. I think he was talking about a country called Brazil, wasn't he? When he talked about stadium rackets. Am I correct in thinking, understanding that the cost of many of these stadiums has gone up by 1, 2, 3 times? Well, tell me something. You have a profession in this country, as we all have, called the quantity surveyor. Yeah, the architect does the design. He says, yeah, this is what it's going to look like. Then you bring in the quantity surveyor who looks at it and says, yeah, 10,000 tons of bricks, 100,000 tons of steel, 2 million tons of concrete, and they cost the job. And that happened at the beginning of this process, didn't it? They are competent people. They are professionals who do a good job. What has happened to their estimates? Okay, price of steel went up 5%. These things happen. 5%, it may be even 10% there on some particular commodity for putting together a stadium. But I would urge you to go back to the very beginning of the process of designing the stadia. Not just the press release on what it was going to cost, because you know they're lying right from the start, but go and find the capable quantity surveyor, a company that was hired to say, right, we're going to build this thing. We want to know the price of every part of it. Steel, concrete, bricks, whatever else goes into a construction. And they're going to have that, aren't they? They're going to have the list of everything, piping for water, whatever, everything that went into the building. They're going to have a list and they're going to come up with a price. And there's every chance, because they're professionals, that they're honest. They may have been lent on it. It would be interesting to talk to some of them and say, is this your true estimate? Tell me. I won't quote you, but I need to know. Or did somebody push the estimate up? That's where investigative journalists, one place they should be as this monstrous World Cup descends on FIFA, from FIFA on Brazil to rob you. There was mention of, I hear this wonderful term now, ever since the Confederations Cup, we've had the very dubious people at the International Olympic Committee and the even more dubious people at FIFA talking about legacy. And do you remember at the beginning of the demonstrations during the Confederations Cup, Blatter was doing this, sort of silly Brazilians, you just don't realise what the legacy is. Well, I think you do know what the legacy is, and if you're not sure, talk to this man here. You look at that stadium being built up in Amazonia where there's no proper professional football, you know that shouldn't happen. I want to know what were the political fixes between Ricardo Teixeira, Marin and the group around him, thieves with their hands in the same World Cup pot. What deals were made to take stadiums to places where you don't need them? What's the name of the one in the northern part of South Africa?
Mbombela.
Yeah. Tell them about it.
Yeah, that's a shocker. I mean, it was built, the cost exactly like Brazil, just escalated through the roof, fourfold, and it became this. Now it just sits there. It's a great place for cops to hang out on the weekends and do nothing.
And Rob mentioned Green Point. You may remember the pictures. At the tip of Cape Town, there's this beautiful parkland. Not surprisingly, it's called Green Point. A place for you to walk, for you to jog, for you to go with your friends. Blatter wanted a stadium there because the pictures are just fantastic. You take them from the seaside, you've got Table Mountain, which is spectacularly beautiful. He wanted to stick a stadium there, and they don't know what to do with it, do they? No. And this is in a big city. This ain't up north in a sort of nowhere land. Call it Manos, if I pronounce it properly. No disrespect to the people there, but they don't need the stadium, and you know they don't need it, and you know your country doesn't need it. What was the chain of decision-making that got it there? And it's not just Ricardo Teixeira. He may have been driving it. And you need to be out there asking those questions, and you need to develop the skills to get people to talk to you. So one thing I want to talk about two things. One is about how to steal documents. And the other is, we'll have some clips, because I want to talk about the value of doorsteps. Many of you have seen clips of me approaching Mr. Teixeira in Zurich saying, "Hello, did you take your bribes to the Sanud company?" And that was the end of him. But I want to talk about how you put it together, what the logistics are, what the morality of it is. But first of all, I just want to tell you a little story about how I really got into FIFA. Now, I knew they were corrupt. I'd spent many years looking at the crooks at the International Olympic Committee, and when I get to the clips later on, I'll show you one which you might not have seen. Not a lot of people have. It's 21 years ago, and I had no grey hair, I don't think. And I think it's worth showing you that again. But I knew that FIFA was crooked. I knew that two companies were paying bribes, but I didn't have any proof at all. I knew that the ISL marketing company, eventually we got the $100 million of bribes and got Leos, got Teixeira, got Avalanche, and a few more. But it took 9 years of working that source. Please, can I hear? I knew the document was there, and that was just cultivating a source. But the way I got started with FIFA, having deep suspicions of the criminality going on there, because just get this clear, they're not football administrators who make mistakes. You make mistakes. You make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes. I'm not a criminal. I don't get up in the morning and think, where can I steal from? Or go on running my criminal empire. That's called FIFA. And how your immigration police can allow Sepp Blatter and his executive committee and his 10 or 15 departmental directors, you know, the ones that tell you you're not working hard enough and you've got to give them tax breaks, how are they going to get through the airport? They should be, the immigration should just say, sorry, I don't know what this is, you haven't got a visa. Go away, we've had enough thieving. Now, if you have that as a view, it's not going to happen, of course, but think about it in terms that it should. You don't import criminals into this country. They're all part of Interpol. Your immigration police know that, oh, we're not having him. Oh, no, don't let him in. Well, why not? If you take that mindset, that view that FIFA have come to rob you, right? Teixeira said it could be done. He said, you were all stupid. You were just, there's only two things in Brazil, pretty girls on the beach in bikinis and these crazy, not very bright people who love football. We can rob them blind. Oh, Brazil, it's a brick country. It's getting bigger, more money. Oh. I was doing presentations in Sao Paulo last year where I used the image of great big cows with great big udders. And that's what FIFA's been doing to you. They've been milking you, and they continue to milk you. And only the journalists can do anything about it. You know as much as I do, much more than I do about the politicians and the ones that don't want to do anything. You know you've got a president who might want to do anything and who suffered under the dictatorship, and I never forget what they did to her, but she's the prisoner of these political groups. You are the people who can activate and energize the people of Brazil to see what is being done to them. It's called raping and looting, and in other circumstances it's illegal. Why is it legal to do it to you? So how I got started with FIFA. Well, I knew there was big corruption. I've been working on the International Olympic Committee for some years, and I couldn't help but pick up the Barham brothers who run Match and the ticketing. Couldn't help but pick up there was some, obviously, bribes going in from ISL. No evidence, but you talk late at night in bars around the world with sports officials, and they tell you things. I'm not a sports reporter, by the way. I always say, don't send me to the game, I might get the scoreline wrong. I do thieving and corruption. I won't have nothing interesting to say about the playing of football. Probably a good thing too. So anyway, an editor in London said to me, hey Andrew, you've done the IOC, have a go at FIFA. And I said, no, I'm not going to spend years on the road getting to understand this creature. It's too much. Oh, go on, he said, go on. Oh, all right. So I went to a Sepp Blatter press conference in early 2000, during 2000, and I knew then from my own sources that the ISL marketing company, which I knew had paid bribes, didn't know to whom I could guess, but didn't have any documents, didn't have any proof. I knew FIFA was rotten. How am I going to get inside FIFA? What is the tin opener? What is the lever? How do you get inside? Because what you must remember in all investigations, never mind this sports stuff we're talking about, but any time you're looking at a major company, a government, a section of government, a government department, any big organization may well be led by crooks. But as you come down the management tier, there are what are called workers, who by and large are decent people. They control what we used to call the filing cabinets, and we now call the servers. There's moral people. Now, at FIFA, Blatter is a sex pig. So if you can get to some of the women, he can't keep his hands off them. There's no trade union at FIFA. You don't want to be sacked because in a small town like Zurich, you're not going to get a job reference. So a lot of women have put up with the feel in the lift. Oh, hello, I'm in room number 97. But nobody dared do anything because they didn't want to get... You just learn to move. You know, women, how to move fast in those circumstances. You can't go too far in a lift. But the pain has been inflicted. The staff who have to kiss his arse because they want their Christmas bonus. They want the foreign trips with extra bonuses and per diems. So how do you find those people? How do you say to them, hey, I'll do the job. Just, you've got the documents. I've got the determination. I've got the media access. We should get married. So I went to his first press conference and I just sat there and I looked at it because I figured this was where the job had to be done. And I'm banned now for 10 years, so I haven't seen the auditorium they now use. But in the previous FIFA house, it was somewhat similar to this room, rows and rows of seats, and either side you had the FIFA blazers, the staff. Robots. Faces that showed nothing. They wanted to keep their jobs. And a lot of them were brought in to line the room. Didn't say anything, didn't do anything. But you knew that some of them were honest. Some of them were moral. So how do you reach out to them? So I thought, well, fuck this. And went to the next press conference, dressed in my very best clothes. Not as good as that. Clean. Always clean, showered, clean clothes, but I don't wear a suit. I did have one for Brasilia the other year. I think I borrowed it. But making it clear you're not with all these nice suits and silk ties from the sports press. You're not one of them. You're not I was going to mention the biggest media group in the country. Never mind. You're different. There's hunger in your eyes. And you're not impressed by the bunch of crooks up here. President Blatter. So I figured out what to do. And I sat there while we got yap for the wire services, PA and AP and Roy to put it all down. You know, FIFA's wonderful. In fact, it's even more wonderful than we said last time, and everything is fantastic. And we were starting to run stories about the ISL bribes, very carefully, but getting the word bribe into the papers. Just to send the signal, we're coming for you. So I go to the press conference, and I get in the front row, dressed in my finest battle dress, and the runabout with a microphone, stupidly, first Q&A, get the first question. Right? Now, Blatter has to be called president. I think he gets a sort of testosterone failure if he isn't called Mr. President. It matters to him. which is why when I do journalism seminars around Brazil, I always say, don't shout abuse, don't shout rude words. Boo. Just go boo. Don't insult him, boo him. He hates it. Then he does stupid things and says stupid things. Anyway, so there I'm in the front row, get the mic. Herr Blatter, Mr. Blatter, not bloody president. I didn't elect him, neither did you. And you don't know anybody that did. What's your national sport? Nobody asked you, did they? Herr Blatter, have you ever taken a bribe? His brain fucked. He didn't know what to say because all these very respecting journalists, never say anything like that. And immediately, as if I'd farted, space opens up around me. And I was working with some German journalists who were sitting laughing themselves silly in another part because I told them I was going to do this. But all these very nice, respectable reporters from respectable media, you're very lucky. They interpret FIFA for you. They tell you it's even better than it was last year. So they're all moving away. Great, the plan is working. I've done a verbal fart. I'm in my own space at the front. All the Blazers can see this. Here's somebody who's crossed the road saying, where's the fight? Wherever it is, I want to be there. Not physically, but intellectually, evidentially. So I've sent the message to all the Blazers. Do you know the term Blazers? We use it in English. They all wear the same jacket with the FIFA badge. They're the Blazers collectively, yeah? I'm sending radio signals to them. Have you noticed? I've just told the man he's a twat. I've just made it clear I couldn't give a proverbial about his pomposity, his power. I'm looking for it. Where's the fight? And that signal, he then goes, I have never taken a bribe. Well, that gave me the headline for the next day's paper. Blatter says, I've never taken a bribe. So bribes into play in the headline, and it's going to go back into Switzerland to remind anybody who wasn't there. It's sending the message, we don't respect this fella. We don't believe him. We think he's a crook. And we're sending messages to the Blazers. Somebody's got to be taking it in. For all the ones going, what a way to speak to the president. There's more going, or there's some going, I've waited for years. Because I'm not going to give a document to all these nice suits. Hello, my suit's more expensive than yours. You couldn't afford a silk tie like this. I'm from a big newspaper in Britain or somewhere in Europe or maybe even from Brazil. They see I'm different. I'm not impressed by this little turd, this little, thief in front of me. He's got to be taken. And the message has gone out. And I went outside with my German friends and we laughed after that. We filed the story, Blatter denies taking bribes, and that was enough for the day. It took 6 weeks later. I'm outside a building at midnight down on the waterfront, the lakeside in Zurich. I've been emailed to be there. I'm standing there in the dark, and I'm not the biggest fellow in the world, I'm past the street fighting now. I'm thinking, what's going to happen? It's absolutely silent. Switzerland has gone to bed, and I'm standing outside the door of this big stone building, and it opened. Come in. I'm taken up to an office. This is an intermediary. I sit and I think I know what's happening, but nobody's told me. And then, after a cup of coffee, a senior FIFA official arrives. An official, not one of the elected crooks, but one of the employees arrives with a great bundle of documents. Look, he said, it's just going too fast for me. Well, I'm realizing Christmas has come, and it worked. Send the message out that you're not impressed, you don't believe them, you want to use your pin to prick the pomposity of the president, and you're sending messages to the staff. Now, whether you're doing it with a government ministry, whether you're doing it with your great state-owned oil company, which I think needs lots of investigation, I know some of you are doing it, you've got to find a way to send messages to the honest, decent workers, managers, middle level, that you're there, you're hungry for it, you'll never betray them, you'll never let them down, you have techniques for getting the documents from them and redoing them. And we do it for television. We take a document like the FIFA bribes list. It's never been seen because we gave it to our graphics people and they turned it into what we call a rolling graphic. They retyped the whole thing, leaving out a couple of columns which could have identified the source, and just used the names and the money and the dates. So our source, who took a very big risk giving me that, was protected. So there's every kind of technical thing you can do in newspapers, you can do in television, but you can always reformat the document, lift out what you want, put it in a new font, new typeface, and so on. Use your ingenuity to get this visual message in front of people. So what I'm saying there is very simple. Don't look at CBF or any government ministry or any very large company that you feel should be investigated in any part of Brazil. Know that when you come down the work structure, there'll be perfectly decent people who have to work, they've got to feed their families, they've got to pay their rent, and they're moral. They don't like what the bosses upstairs are doing because they see the documents. They see the expenses claimed. I got Sepp Blatter's personal expense claim out of FIFA for a couple of years, and it was wonderful how he managed to get FIFA to pay for all his different girlfriends to fly around the world with never meeting each other. But I put the question into FIFA, they never answered. So it's about sending out the signal that you'll do the job, that you have the courage and the skills to do it, and here you are. Meet me behind the pub. Meet me somewhere. Make sure people have your email, have your phone numbers. Make sure they're well known as contacts, and then signal to the workers, the lower level, that you're there for it. And I found one source who'd been taking documents home since 1984. That was several Christmases rolled into one. I stood up all night in my Zurich hotel room because I had to return them at their photocopy machine. I think I lost half my eyesight just docking on. A big bag that broke on the way home to Britain at the airport. So what I'm saying is don't look at them as monolithic organisations. Look at all these organisations as groupings with good people in there. It's your job to identify those people, to send the messages out, the radio signals. Sometimes you can do it through doing powerful stories, and they will start to make approaches to you. You've probably all experienced that. I'm just giving you one example of how I went in there, verbally farted, and sweet smells came back forever. So it's a technique. Think about it wherever you're operating. Just because they're crooks at the top, it's pretty likely that as you move down the management structure, they're decent, honest people, doing a job, and they're moral. You've got to send the message, I'm moral too, and I'll never betray you. Nobody will ever know it was you, or you, or you, because that's one of my work skills to making sure you're not traced. But I'll do the business. I'll do it. Promise. And it can work. Certainly worked with Herr Blatter. Sorry, President Blatter. So that's a point of technique that you can apply anywhere. It worked with FIFA. It works elsewhere. What I'm trying to do is open your minds, because you often are told about a monolithic organisation. Brazilian security services, well, you're never going to talk to them. Yes, there'll be people there who are very upset. Look at the CIA. I mean, they've got a long history of leakers, right through to Mr. Snowden, currently residing in Russia. You've got to, and he didn't go to the New York Times, he didn't like their coverage, he went to the Washington Post and the London Guardian. You've got to be saying, I'm over here, hello, I do good stuff. You've got to work out ways, look at the institution, how to send a signal that you're the man or woman to do the job. Try it. And it's good fun. Now, a totally separate subject I wanted to look at quickly was...
Andrew, we have just 15 minutes until the end of the session.
Right, I shall be 9 minutes.
Okay.
To the whole session.
The whole session.
The whole session.
Yeah.
Right. Well, look, I think what shall I do? The other part I brought along with me, I thought we'd got an hour and a half. Yeah. Have I talked that long?
Well,
Sorry. One of the things I've been told by my friends in Brazilian television is that you don't do what we call doorsteps, walk-ups. Some people call them ambushes. We call them walk-ups. It sounds better. And I think many of you have seen the Hello, Mr. Teixeira, did you take your bribes from the Sanoud company? And I think it's very important, particularly for television journalists, to work out when to do a doorstep. I don't think we'll show them all. I think you've seen the more recent ones that I bought. I bought 5 with me. I bought Nicholas Lales, Ricardo Teixeira. I think you've probably seen those. And 2 with Blasser doorstepping him at his own office and at an airport, asking him about bribes. He doesn't like it. And it tells stories to the viewers. So I'll show you one clip in a moment from a long time ago, which was like all these things. When you've done it, it's great fun. You've got to talk with your executives. First of all, is it moral? Are we doing a public interest story? Should the people see the guy, because it's nearly always a male, confronted with something about his past? We're not talking about his girlfriends. We're talking about thieving, corruption, documents, or, as you're going to see, photographs. And you've got to be sure in your own mind that the viewers, when they watch this, will think you've been fair. And if they think you shouldn't have done the doorstep... Now, I've never met anybody in Brazil who's told me I shouldn't have doorstepped Teixeira. Nobody. But you've got to be sure that the viewers are going to come with you. So you make the case to your bosses. This guy, we've done the research. Let's confront him with the evidence. And this is where it can go very badly wrong, and I've seen dreadful stuff on television in England and elsewhere, where you've got the macho cowboys, don't fucking doorstep him, and it's just a disaster, because the viewer sees some guy being really tough, I'll confront them. And it doesn't work. You've got to be a little mouse. Excuse me. And the viewer feels at ease with you. It's the questions that matter. So what we do at the BBC is, like with Teixeira and with the other guys in Latin American football that we've gone after, they wouldn't let me go near Havelange. They were too worried about his pacemaker, that he might die. You don't want someone to die during the doorstep. What do you do with the footage? Put it on YouTube? No. So I was never allowed to get near him. But with Teixeira, he got 2 emails, absolutely moral and fair. Dear Mr. Teixeira, BBC Television, we would like to interview you about your involvement with the ISL marketing company. But this time I've got the bribe document. We know what we're doing. But it's polite. Because if anybody's going to show it later with no embarrassment, we were seen to behave properly. No reply, leave it 2 weeks, send it again. Slightly different words, but it's really important. We really would like to interview you about this topic. So you've covered yourself morally. They can't then start feeding out to the press that you were thuggish, that you sent rude emails. You were absolutely beautifully low-key moral. And when we do this, my editor, who's here, Tom Giles, who's speaking later today, will read it. Probably one of our BBC lawyers will read it, and that's good. So we're very at ease with what we're about to do, because he's not going to reply, but we've been seen to be moral. And then you go to see them. The logistics can be huge. Where are they? When can you get them on the street? More and more, it's harder and harder to get to the top people these days, because their car's in the car park underneath the office. Very hard to get in there. Where do you find them? Well, you find out when they're going to be on a public footpath somewhere, on a pavement, where it's legal to walk up. You never have physical contact. You never touch them. You make sure if they move towards you, move back, so nobody can ever accuse you of hitting them, bashing them, intimidating them. And you ask the questions low-key, and then you shut up. Because you are not interesting. I am not interesting. It's what they say that's interesting. And with Blasser, there isn't time to show it now. You've probably seen the doorsteps I've done with him in the past. Ask the question about what do you know about the bribes, and be quiet. That he says, I don't know anything about it. Well, you already showed in the build-up to that he does know. You've set the whole thing up. You're just asking the question the viewer wants you to ask. You've told the story. So I'll just show you one now. When I started into the International Olympic Committee, with somebody who's done a lot better in the movies than I have, Paul Greengrass, who now has just directed Captain Phillips, did the Bourne movies. Very good operator, very good journalist. And it was Paul's idea that I got into this corruption in the sports federations, and we were going to do an IOC book together. Then he went off on his route to Hollywood, and we stay in touch. But Brilliant man, great idea. Right, so I start digging into Samarang, as you do. Who is this man? Just like you do a new politician, somebody says, I want to be president of Brazil. Okay, fair enough. Where'd you go to school? What kind of dope did you smoke? How many women did you fuck without the husbands knowing? Because it's relevant to public life. Did the women know? Whatever, you build pictures, don't you, of people who want to aspire to be in public life. So I'm digging into Samarang, and I'm digging and I'm digging and I'm reading all these really boring profiles written by sports reporters. Oh, for fuck, I don't need to know all this stuff, but you read it and you read it, and then Christmas comes. I'm halfway down a piece, when would it be, 1991, and I saw he was sports minister in Spain in the 1970s. 1960s. What? I know a bit about European history. They had their military dictatorship. Yeah? It was the Franco dictatorship from 1939 until the old bastard died in 1975. If you were in the government, you were a fascist. You had to be. You couldn't get in otherwise. They weren't as tolerant. Franco wasn't as tolerant as your military were by sort of co-opting some people he didn't really like, but it was politically useful to use them. So I know Samarang's an old arm waver. That's what he is. He's a goose stepper. He's a jackbooter. Because you had to do all those things at the fascist ceremonies in fascist Spain. So I start to work on the photographs, get into the photographic libraries in Spain. And most of it has been weeded. But I found some stuff. Let's have a look, shall we? Oh, we go just for number one. So I know he's a fascist. This is the news. So we show the viewers the old days. There he is. Look at them. Fascists and mafia. Look, do you ever see a mafia group? He's taking control of Spanish sport. They killed the people they didn't like. Where's the sound? There's no audio. I wonder if it was going to be quiet. Can we just stop it a minute then? I'll just tell you what's going on. Sorry, what you heard. Oh, he's very good. Prior to this strange fellow popping up in the only suit I ever owned, because I thought he knows how to do it. I showed that newsreel from Spain. What I'm doing is something. You sports minister. And, you only got to show those pictures to see that Franco's government was a bunch of mafia. I mean, they look like they're signed up in Palermo or Rio. So, having shown the pictures, don't believe me, I'm just a reporter. Look at the pictures. Here he is with his lot, right? And so, what I now say is we've come... Right, how does it go? It goes, we've come here to Lausanne. I knew he was in town. I knew he was at the Lausanne Palace Hotel. He travelled a lot, so the logistics is finding out he's in town, which means he's staying at a particular hotel, and he's going to come out in the morning. And it was March, and it was cold. And I got the crew in the shop doorway down from the entrance to this very expensive hotel, and I'm on a radio mic, which we'll get to tell you what happens. I'm on a radio mic, so I can sort of stand in front of the hotel entrance, just talking into the radio mic. It's a sound recorder, so it's got the receiver for it. Here he is, right, he's in the lobby, he's talking to people, but he's there. The big Merc pulls up, we know it's going to be for him, which is the crew are now ready, they're tense, ready to go. Because I've just been saying, he's talking in the lobby. I'll just be ready for him, he's going to cars there. Right, let's go, and boom. They know what they're doing. Very, very professional street fighting cameraman, great sound recorders, they're in. And so at the end of this sequence, I showed the photographs. I thought, well, how can we tell this to the... Hello, hola. It's great audio on this. The audio is fantastic, by the way. I should put it on YouTube, shouldn't I? And it matters for Rio, because Samarang chose about roughly still about half of the IOC members. So these people, like FIFA, who come into Rio with International Olympic Committee, you're very lucky to meet us. And hey, I've got my job on the IOC because I kissed the arse of a Nazi. Ask them to pronounce, say, was Samaranch a fascist? Taboo word. You could say fuck, but don't say the other F word. They don't, it's never said. And you've got to get into the press conferences and say, was this all created by Samaranch, who was a fascist? Well, that's your accreditation gone, but, you know, these questions have to be asked. So what I'm going to do now, this is the spring of 1992, we're working up to the Barcelona Games, is I've got two photographs of Samaranch with Franco. You can't get better than that, yeah? With the bloody, bloodthirsty, murdering dictator and Samaranch doing that. I'm a pretty girl, really. And so I hold them up, and then we go into the doorstep. Shall I commentate the words for you? Right, shall we go? Yeah? Here we are. And I'm saying, in the Olympic Museum, the archives of every president are donated. Well, we've brought some photographs along today to donate to the Olympic Museum. No, I mean, you never have those. Here he comes. Good morning, President Samaranch, British Television. Can I present you with these photographs for the Olympic Museum? And he's thinking, what the fuck's going on here? I mean, how did you get those? We weeded the archives. What the fuck is going on here? Well, can I ask you, please, are you still a fascist? Do you still believe in fascism? Can I give you the photographs? So you don't get very long, but you're doing it for the viewers. And I'm saying, do you still believe in fascism? And so you then take, you know, that it's been done for the viewer, right? What's the viewer seeing? You've had that build-up. We did earlier stuff about German planes bombing Barcelona during the Civil War. So there's been all the build-up. You know, all that's left for the viewer is, fuck's sake, go and ask him, you know. You've proved your case, you've got movie footage, you've got still footage. Okay, nobody ever told us. They all said, hello, he's a wonderful man, you know, he runs the Olympic Committee. They do it for the young people. Then you're getting all this crap now, aren't you? And you're spending a fortune on an event in 2 years' time where there will be a massive amount of unregulated performance-enhancing drugs and a very wonderful lifestyle and lots of money exported from the country.
Andrew, use mic.
Is he gone again?
No, just take it to the mouth.
Right, oh, you can hear, can't you? You got the gist of it. Sorry?
The translation.
You can't hear it? Ah, well, that really does matter, doesn't it? Can you hear it now? Because I'm just about done. Was that the thumbs up? So, we're talking about technique here. That here you do your research, you get the photographs, you go, as we did, to the archives in Madrid, where they hadn't all been weeded. Most of it had. After Franco died in 1975, people like Samaranch were in. It took me another 8 years to get the photograph of him with his right arm in the air. Don't take that photograph, I don't mean it. But I got it eventually, of him at a fascist ceremony. It's quite interesting. It was 1974. Everybody knew Franco was going to die. And you can see the old-fashioned fascists all going, oh, kill the Reds. Who weren't the Reds? They, kill the Reds, kill the Reds. And Samaranch, the wily politician, has got his arm here. He knows it's coming to an end. Spain has to go democratic, has to join the European Union. He's got to have his arm up. But you can see he's really worked out the lowest point. It could be just... Whereas around him, and this photograph's on my website, currently down because I'm getting hit by all kinds of attacks, but it'll be back up again. You see the older generation of Nazis around him. Whoa, oh, yeah. They don't realise the world's coming to an end. So, it was about technique. You see how we set that up for television? We showed the evidence until the viewer is saying, I want it. What's he got to say about it? And you go, oh, right, then we'll go and see him. That, effectively, that's what you're doing in your program structure, is show your evidence. So it's not people talking, it's physical evidence. Documents, photographs, newsreels, whatever. We did use one or two people talking about his fascist past, but we could have done without it. And then you do the doorstep. Polite, never touched him, never impeded, never got in his way, allowed him to walk clearly to his car. And this is what did amuse me. The idea we had, photographs for the Olympic Museum. Because all presidents donate their archives, and you know that's not going in the archive. So there's a bit of technique.